Cam Ward will be the number one pick in the 2025 NFL draft, but should he be the top pick in your superflex drafts? We will get to that on this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter /X at Kate Madjuk. And on today's show, we're taking a look at our first quarterback prospect that we've profiled this year, and that's Cam Ward, the assumed number one pick in the 2025 NFL draft. Kate, I love that you come into these evaluations like not watching a ton of college football, so you've got like an uncluttered mind. What did you see from Cam Ward when you turned on the tape?
When you turn on the tape for Cam Ward, you're going to see a playmaker. He is 21 years old. He's experienced, a former 0-star recruit. So let's just appreciate the journey that Cam Ward has been on. 0-star recruit to the number one overall pick. But where he wins is in his arm strength and his playmaking ability. He can extend plays far beyond what you would guess based on the fact that he's not really a rushing quarterback, but his natural athleticism allows him to extend plays in big ways, sometimes even a little bit longer than he should.
Yeah, I'm going to read you some of the notes I have, and I don't want to be the guy that just reads his scouting notes because it's kind of boring and lame, but I think he's got a really live arm. Not like he's got Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, where he can just whip it 80 yards down the field, but I think he's got a very good NFL arm. I love the functional athleticism. Like, he used his athleticism to get outside the pocket, to move around in the pocket. He can run, but that's not really how he wins. Okay. And my favorite part about him is the same thing I loved about Caleb Williams coming out. He's just a playmaker. Like,
he's creative.
Yeah, he's creative. And he went to Washington State from Incarnate Word, or we're going to get to the stats in a second, and turned Washington State into a pretty good team. He went to Miami and turned Miami into a really, really good offense. Now, it's not his fault that he can't cover anybody on defense, but Miami was a really good team this year because of Cam Ward. I think there's just a lot of positives about him between the athleticism, the arm strength, and the confidence that he's going to go out there and be the difference why his team wins compared to maybe why they shouldn't.
Yeah, the stats you mentioned, he is one of the most productive college quarterbacks ever, Marcus. You've got a good stat here.
Yeah, I'll double check, but I'm pretty sure he's got the most passing yards and the most passing touchdowns in the history of college football. Now, you have to go use his numbers at Incarnate Word on top of what he did at Washington State and Miami. And it's helped that he's played, I think, 5-6 seasons. So it's not quite apples to apples with some of these other comparisons, but you're looking at somebody who's thrown, 125 touchdowns at the collegiate level. And if you're watching with us on YouTube right now, you could see like he's throwing all these touchdowns and he's not really throwing a lot of interceptions either. 9 at Washington State in 2022, 7 in 2023, 7 in 2024, despite 39 touchdowns this year. Like, he just posts monster numbers, and he's been this way junior high school, junior college, now into the college ranks, and I got to believe he's going to do the same in the NFL.
Yeah, before transferring out of the FCS, 4,600 passing yards, 47 touchdowns, 10 interceptions in his 2021 season. That is #pretty dang good.
Yes.
We saw year-over-year improvement in most efficiency categories for Cam Ward too, as he kind of took that next step, playing in the Pac-12, then going to the ACC, saw improvement in the touchdown percentage, still kept those interceptions low, like you mentioned, yards per attempt, yards per completion, yards per game, passer efficiency rating. Like, despite, going to bigger programs, he continued to produce. And to have 5 seasons of production here at the age of 21, that's pretty impressive. He's almost like the opposite of a Trey Lance coming out, where he's
Yes.
so experienced that you know you're going to be really happy to have that sort of day one, confidence
Well,
mentality as a starting quarterback in the
we saw
NFL.
this work out well last year for Jaden Daniels, who was a 24-year-old rookie. Bo Nix, who had like 55 starts. Michael Penix was an older player. He's not as old as those guys, but he's got a ton of college experience. And I do think that's going to help with the transition to the NFL.
Yep, for sure. And a big part of that, I think, again, just going to be that playmaking ability and getting him into a situation where you can allow him to be creative. He's got that big arm. The one, I don't know, that we've talked a lot about the strengths, right? Let's talk about the weaknesses. Can work on being more consistently accurate. And I think part of that accuracy issue sometimes comes down to arm strength. Like sometimes it just feels like maybe he lacks like the touch to just kind of put the ball where it needs to be at times, because he's got this big arm. And sometimes it just comes out like a cannon, and good when you're throwing the deep ball, not as great when you're trying to make some of these more delicate passes like over the middle of the field. And that can put the ball in danger. Plays a little too much hero ball. Little too much.
It's funny because I do think he's inaccurate at times, but he's not to the point of like Anthony Richardson. Yeah, it's not that. Where it is, it's the consistency, right? I would say generally he's pretty inaccurate, but man, you see him rip some of these balls down the seam, or he's on the run and he throws the ball on the sideline, pinpoint accuracy. I think a lot of it is just the footwork has gotten really lazy because he's been the best player on the field in college football for 5 years. But that's not going to be the case when you get to the NFL. You're going to have to be better with the footwork. You're going to have to be more fundamentally sound. And you mentioned my top weakness for him. He's got the main character syndrome, where he thinks he's the best guy on the field, and he plays hero ball, trying to win every game with one throw. That works in college, and we saw that work with like Zach Wilson and Caleb Williams in college. You get in the NFL, you can't do that and survive. So he's going to need the right head coach, the right play caller to rein him in. But I'm going to use one of my favorite Mike Tomlin quotes. You know my thoughts on Mike Tomlin, but I'd rather say "whoa" than "sick 'em." Right? I'd rather try to rein a quarterback in rather than trying to ask him to be more aggressive. Because most of these quarterbacks, if they're not aggressive coming out of college, they're not going to be aggressive in the NFL. I think he can be reined in. And I think I'd rather just do that than having to try to teach someone to be aggressive. Like that was the concern for Marcus Mariota coming out of school was, okay, he plays in a very system offense. Will he be able to be somebody that's aggressive throwing the ball down the field? And it never really happened. I think you have more success with this type of player rather than that.
I love that. And I think generally speaking, when you're looking at a guy like Cam Ward, you like that confidence, right? Because the quarterback is a position that you need to have, I think, that just innate, I don't know what the word is, drive, that innate like confidence and that natural leadership ability. But a lot of that stuff, like that translates to the field, and that translates to the way you lead your football team to a winning record or whatever game-winning drive, like that. All of that translates. And yeah, I'd rather have a guy maybe have a little too much oomph than not enough oomph.
We're going to talk about we're going to talk about some comps in a little bit, and the range of comps here is pretty wide, but you've seen this type of passer in the NFL over the last couple of years, whether it's like a Zach Wilson, who was maybe too wild, Caleb Williams, who I think is a good combination, or the quarterback that I'm going to compare him to in a little bit. But Kate, let's talk about some of the analytics here. What do the metrics say about Cam Ward and the likelihood for success in the NFL? We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That is 200 extra bucks that you can use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories to even who's cutting down the nets at the end of the tournament. I've got my eye on a few underdogs this year, and FanDuel is making it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. And with tournament games happening almost every day, I can't wait for that Thursday, Friday stretch. It's so much fun. There's always something exciting to bet on. Plus, the FanDuel app is simple and easy to use. And when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your money. It shows up right in your account. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We are discussing Miami quarterback Cam Ward, the likely number 1 overall pick in the 2025 NFL Draft. Okay, we talked about some of our scouting notes on him after watching his tape. What did the numbers show us here?
The numbers here were really promising, just as you would expect for a guy with a lot of production, right? In 2024, his advanced percentiles per PFF, 95th percentile in clean pocket grade, 88th percentile in first and second down grade, 96th percentile on no play action grade. That's one of my favorite advanced metrics to look at, because we do know that play action can sometimes mask, inefficiencies at the quarterback position or inaccuracies on throws at or beyond the sticks, 92nd percentile, and sack rate 64th percentile. Generally speaking, a very clean analytical profile, which most would be pretty excited about coming into the next level.
Yeah, the only thing that concerns me here is the sack rate. I mean, it's not a great sack rate for somebody who is as talented and as athletic as he is. I'm of the
But
belief
that comes down to the play extension component.
He'll take some egregious sacks that, like, you just shake your head like, come on, Cam. Like, you don't need to try to take a sack on 1st and 10 and now it's 2nd and 29. Like, just get rid of the ball, move on to the next play. And this comes all the way back to that hero ball that we were talking about. Like, you got to live to fight another day when you're these quarterbacks. It's okay to have an incompletion or a 2-yard gain. Like, not everything needs to be a 40-yard rocket down the middle of the field. But a couple other stats that I wanted to put out there. Done a lot of research on some quarterback analytics, Kate, and one of the more telling numbers is how you perform on 3rd down. That's the money down in the NFL. And if you look at like all the quarterbacks who have hit in the NFL, whether it's Mahomes, Jaden Daniels, CJ Stroud, all of those guys were awesome on 3rd down. They almost all averaged over 8 yards per attempt on 3rd down. Cam Ward, 9.3 yards per attempt in 2024 on 3rd down. That's absolutely fantastic. And then the red zone numbers are really good as well. He had 1 interception inside the red zone this year, 21 passing touchdowns. If you're good in the red zone and you're good in 3rd downs, you're going to be good in the NFL.
And I do think the red zone is kind of important when we're looking at Cam Ward, because you mentioned the tendency to kind of look for that big chunk play, that 40-yard gain. When you're in the red zone, it is a condensed field. You don't have as much room to work with. So I do like the fact that we saw him succeed under those circumstances, because that, when it's that condensed field, there is a lot of room for mistakes, especially if you are a guy that tends to play a little bit of hero ball. So
yes,
all of that, I think, is a big plus in Cam Ward's favor. And again, generally speaking, like, I think part of that can come with just the confidence that comes with a lot of experience as a quarterback, and he's got that.
All right, let's talk about some landing spots. To me, there are only 3 landing spots here. It's the Titans, Browns, Giants. Like, he's just not getting outside of those picks. I think let's just assume that he's drafted by the Titans. How do you like that fit with the Callahans, Brian and Bill Callahan, with Calvin Ridley as your number 1 receiver? What do you think about that one?
I mean, definitely not the most exciting fit, because I think in part, I don't necessarily feel confident that I understand the identity of the type of offense that the Tennessee Titans really want to run. If they have their franchise quarterback and they don't need to patchwork an offense around a quarterback that has inefficiencies. What does that look like? I'm not 100% sure.
The good news is I think the Titans are at least trending in the right direction on the offensive line. Dan Moore was one of the bigger shocks in free agency, but they needed a
Mhm.
left tackle. Now they can move J.C. Latham, who they drafted inside the top 10, back to his natural position at right tackle. They got Peter Skoronski, who played really well in the second half of last year, back at left guard. They paid Lloyd Cushenberry a lot of money last year in free agency, and then they signed Kevin Zeitler to be their starting right guard. So in theory, this should be a pretty good offensive line. Like they've covered their bases a little bit. It's just the weapons, I think, here, Kate, are underwhelming. Is that fair to say?
Yes. Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to put this in general, is the lack of weapons. But I mean, generally speaking, if we're looking at, the prospective offenses that could be in line to draft Cam Ward, there are a lot of them that have, deficiencies in terms of their personnel, in terms of maybe their depth of playmakers. So, like, it's not necessarily just a Titans problem. It's a
No.
problem if he goes to the Browns. Like, I know we saw Jerry Jeudy find a lot of success in this offense in his first year in Cleveland. Um, Cedric Tillman, another really exciting younger wide receiver that could be in for that big third year breakout after a really promising leap forward last year. Like, I don't know. There's
So,
not a ton of situations that you look at and say, okay, um, we're loaded with weapons, and there's going to be a better fit there than others.
but let me say this. Don't overreact to the lack of weapons for most. I mean, for Cam Ward, because like look at back-to-back years. We saw Jaden Daniels go to Washington, and we like Terry McLaurin. I mean, Terry McLaurin's a good player, but we were really worried about, okay, it's Zach Ertz and old Austin Eckler and Diami Brown as the number 2 receiver. And look what Jaden Daniels did this year. Go back to 2023 when it was Nico Collins, who I think never had more than 600 yards in a season before CJ Stroud got there. They drafted this 155-pound soaking wet receiver, Tank Dell, in the 3rd round. And Stroud had one of the best rookie seasons you'll ever see. So I understand that this is not like the most ideal situation, but it's only a temporary thing. Like these teams can get receivers, they can improve their
Yep.
offensive line. I just don't want to overreact too much because, hey, they only have Calvin Ridley right now.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. Things change now more rapidly than ever in the National Football League. So, yeah, definitely don't want to make a resounding decision on a player's outcome just because, you're not sure about the pieces around them because, again, things change rather quickly here
Yep.
in the NFL.
All right, okay, let's talk about his dynasty value currently, where he's going in rookie drafts, superflex rookie drafts, and let's give our player comps for Cam Ward entering the NFL. We will get to that next.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Draft Show with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. I'm sure they'll be talking about Cam Ward plenty over the next couple of weeks. And now that the season is over, get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every day. Find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Kate, let's talk about some player comps for our Mr. Cam Ward. Who do you got?
I actually really like your player comp here, Marcus. Tell us who your Cam Ward comp is. And I will say, like, when you look at the range of comps, there's a pretty vast. I don't feel like there's a consensus comp, but I like yours a lot.
I've seen some people compare him to like Ben Roethlisberger, and I understand where they're coming from because it's like it's that play style, kind of the reckless play style, but the playmaker, he just doesn't have that size, right? What he reminds me of, or who he reminds me of, is good, healthy Deshaun Watson that we saw with the Texans, where Watson was this kind of similar player. He was a really good athlete, but not necessarily a runner. He uses athleticism and his bigger body to kind of bounce off defenders in the pocket, and he would make a lot of plays down the field. If Ward can become that sort of player, I think you're looking at a really, really talented quarterback. We've seen Watson's been a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. He's been incredibly useful for us in fantasy and in Dynasty when he's healthy and when he's on the right team and when he's mentally right. That's just who I saw when I watched Cam Ward. But I will say there are parts of his game that do remind me of Zach Wilson in some bad ways, and that's the only thing that has me a little bit hesitant here.
I think all of those comments are fair. I think with Deshaun Watson, it's really easy to see sort of the traits, the upside as a passer, the aggressiveness as a passer paired with the athleticism. They're both a similar build. So I think that's an intriguing one. Again, for Ben Roethlisberger, I definitely think it's definitely more of the play style component there that's playing into the type of quarterback he is. But I think the key for me, and what I think is interesting is that, yeah, he's not built his game on athleticism and designed rush attempts by any stretch of the imagination, but he's got the physical traits to have some upside, I think, in Dynasty, whether it be extending plays around the goal line, whether it be, like, I think those innate traits are going to make him an intriguing prospect. So where would you have him ranked? Let's say we combined the 2024 and 2025 NFL draft classes. Where would he rank in terms of your quarterback? Because obviously 2024, very strong quarterback class. This one, not so much. So where would he fall?
So again, we're doing this as prospects, not how these guys ended up playing as rookies or where they landed. But to me, the top 3 quarterbacks, Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, comfortably clear Cam Ward. So now it's in that next tier of with Michael Penix, JJ McCarthy, Bo Nix. And honestly, Kate, I like him more than all of those quarterbacks. Now, Bo Nix, I think, is going to be better for fantasy just because he landed with Sean Payton. But to me, I think he's above those guys because of his rushing ability. He's much younger than Penix and Bo Nix, but he's way more experienced than somebody like JJ McCarthy. I think he would be 4th. But I think the gap between Drake May as QB3 and let's call Bo Nix at QB4 is, I think he's closer to Nix and Penix than he is to Drake May and Daniels. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that seems fair. I think he's pretty comfortably in that scenario, QB4 for me. Again, when you kind of look at the upside as a passer paired with maybe some of the floor he gets because of his natural athleticism, that's what gets me there. I like the level of experience that he has coming out of college, especially being as young as he is. But I think he's got a lot to like.
Yeah, I think he's got a lot to like as well. Let's talk about where he's being drafted right now in superflex rookie drafts. We actually have some ADP from Dynasty League Football. And Kate, he's going 3rd overall behind Ashton Genty, behind Omari and Hampton. And honestly, I'm kind of surprised. I assumed that Genty would still go 1. I am shocked to see Hampton pass him up in superflex drafts.
It does feel like Hampton is really, since maybe even when we did our profile on Hampton, like a little less than a month ago, I think now, it feels like he's just kind of steadily gaining this buzz. So I'm not entirely surprised, but I do think that, the fact that he's being drafted the 3rd player off the board as a quarterback in superflex leagues tells you a lot about just the general uncertainties of this draft class. But I will say, like, for as much as I don't like this quarterback class in particular, I still think Cam Ward's a pretty decent prospect. So it does feel like a little bit overreactionary. I think Genty just feels like the can't miss guy. And obviously running back, not as scarce a position in super flex leagues, but still a pretty scarce position in general, that if you can get a generational guy, if you can get somebody like a Saquon Barkley, that could be a foundational player of your dynasty team for years and years to come. But Cam Ward, I think much closer to my second player off the board than I can't fathom taking Omarion Hampton, a running back I really like, over Cam Ward in a super flex rookie draft.
So in terms of quarterbacks right now, we've got some ADP from Dynasty League Football. He's being drafted as QB 21. A couple of the quarterbacks ahead of him, Jared Goff, Bryce Young, Michael Penix. Behind him are Anthony Richardson, JJ McCarthy, Tua, Sam Darnold. Does QB 21 feel right, or is that a little low?
Feels a little low.
Yeah, I would take him over Goff at this point, over Dak at this point.
Dak, I can kind of understand. Goff is an interesting one. Obviously has a ton of playmakers around him. I think, the floor is pretty safe for a guy like Jared Goff. Explain the Goff for me.
It's just once you get to the age 30, you're starting to get closer to the back nine, right? No Ben Johnson, who's leaving. The lack of mobility is just going to continue to get worse and worse. Not that there ever was mobility for Goff, but you just have no rushing upside. So it's all based on volume, which of course Jared Goff gets, but I do wonder what's that going to look like as, obviously now that Ben Johnson's gone. I think I would just rather take the rushing upside, even though Cam Ward's not really a runner. I think he can get us 400, 500 rushing yards a season with 5-6 rushing touchdowns.
Yeah, I think that seems like a fair floor. How about Cam Ward or Bryce Young, who we did see had a little bit of a breakout here?
Rushing. It's Cam Ward's gives you that rushing potential that Bryce Young just doesn't have. So I'm just always going to take the guy that's a little bit more, well, first of all, Ward's bigger, but it has the more rushing upside here.
Okay, so it sounds like I think we're closer to Cam Ward as being like closer to QB 15 than we are QB 20. Pretty comfortably have him ahead of Bryce Young, Michael Penix.
Yep.
You make an intriguing point for Jared Goff. That's the kind of range that we're talking about for Cam Ward. But I do think, again, because of that mobility, there's a little bit of upside baked into that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube, download the podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. I'm at Marcus_Mosier, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow on a Wednesday episode with Matt Williamson.